I had to go all the way across the earth to find happiness, and you found happiness at home.
No, it's like the Bluebird play, you know, it was all in my kitchen the whole time. Yeah.
Right there before us. But I was so excited to read this book, and you're going to have to help me with a couple of problems tonight.
Oh, good. This is my favorite thing to do.
Yeah,
yes.
And I've been listening to your new podcast.
Yes.
With your sister who is here tonight, your co-host who is based here in LA.
Yes.
And so
who calls me a happiness bully?
Go figure, right?
Yeah.
So you can bully me for this evening instead. Let's start by talking about why you wanted to write a book about habits, because you say they're the hidden architecture of our lives. Why is it that looking and monitoring at our habits caught your interest?
Well, I got interested in it because I'd been reading and thinking and talking to people about happiness for years, and I began to notice this pattern that when people talked about a big boost in their happiness that they got, or more often a big challenge that they were facing, is often it was really something at its core was a habit. Maybe they weren't characterizing it as a habit, like they'd say, well, I'm just exhausted all the time, you know, but really that was about the habit of getting enough sleep. And so I began to see how there was this pattern of problems related to habit formation. And so I began to start reading and thinking about it more as a category to study. And then a friend said something to me at lunch, totally casually, that got me obsessed with habits. And she said, you know I would be happier if I exercised regularly, but I can't do it. And the weird thing is when I was on high school, I was on the track team, and I never missed track practice, but I can't go running now. Why? And I thought, well, why? Why? Same person, same behavior. At one time it was effortless, now she can't do it. What's going on? And I became obsessed with the idea of trying to solve this puzzle of habits. And it matters hugely for happiness, because as you say, research suggests that about 40% of everyday life is governed by habits. So if you have habits that work for you, you're just much more likely to be happier, healthier, and more productive. And if you struggle with your habits, it's going to be a lot harder for you.
Now, you had another friend at around the same time who said habits, that's awful.
Yes.
And there is that school of thought. You know, we're all here in California raised to be free and do whatever the heck we want. So,
well, and that was one of the things that was most interesting to me, because the thing that was strange is, as I was doing the research for habits, I sort of felt like it was the emperor who has no clothes, because I kept thinking, you know, am I the only one who notices these things? Because no other researchers or anybody writing about it seems to acknowledge these things that to me seem very obvious. For one thing, people have very different aptitude for forming habits. For some people, it's much easier. For other people, it's much more difficult. Why? And then people have very different attitude towards habits.
Right.
Like, many people will say to me, like, well, you're writing about habits, but there's such a negative connotation to that word. And I'm like, really? Because I think of habits as being wonderful. For me, they have, I mean, that's probably why I wrote a book about them. And for me, they have a very positive connotation. So you're exactly right. Like, if you want to think about changing your habits, you really have to face, like, well, how do I feel about habits? How am I going to shape this in a way that's going to work for me? Because if I'm fundamentally opposed to the idea of having habits, I'm going to react very differently when somebody tells me to take blood pressure medication, because I'm going to have a very different attitude towards what's being told me to do.
And that's what was so interesting about this book for me. It wasn't just because you happen to be a person who is possessed of excellent habits. Obviously, for you to have achieved what you've done, have a family.
But so this is the thing that was really surprising to me as I was writing this book, is I was like, well, it's not so hard. I was writing The Happiness Project and Happier in Home, and people would say, well, how did you get yourself to do all these things? And I was like, it's just not that hard. And I truly believed that was true. And in writing this book, and I found a way to frame the differences among people in what I call the Four Tendencies. And one of the things that I learned that really I had to go back and sort of rewrite the whole book was that I thought I was pretty typical. But actually, I'm on the freaky fringe. I'm a very extreme personality, which, by the way, came as a surprise to no one but me. I said to my husband, like, oh my gosh, I'm one of these like tiny category people at the very far edge. And he's like, well, yeah. It's like, well, how did you know that? I said, I've been married to you for more than 15 years. I mean, so I do, and I think that's one of the reasons that I'm drawn to it, is because for someone like me, there is a very positive association and a relative ease with forming habits that now I realize is not true of everyone. And so then it's a question of, well, how do you understand that, offset the limitations of that, because there are limitations. And then for other people who have a different experience, how do they think about the way they frame it.
I like a certain amount of order. It was helpful for me in this book to read, because any of us who live with someone, and I happen to live with someone who is not exactly like me.
Oh, I know all about Ted. We talked about that this morning. We analyzed him this morning.
I happen to live with Ted, and with the red clogs, and it is
unmatched socks.
And unmatched socks, and we have a very different way of thinking. And with the Four Tendencies, maybe we should go through those.
Okay.
It helped me identify that, as you say, I'll let you explain the Four Tendencies.
Okay. So I'm going to go through and describe these, and then I want to go through and have everybody raise their hands, because I'm always really curious to know who's in the audience and how it breaks down, and if a pattern that I've seen is consistent. Okay. So this has to do with how you respond to an expectation. And there's two kinds of expectations. One is an outer expectation, like a work deadline or a request from a spouse or a traffic regulation. And one is an inner expectation, which is like a New Year's resolution or your own desire to write a novel in your free time. So there's four categories of people. The first are upholders. Upholders respond readily to outer and inner expectations alike. They want to know what's expected of them, and they want to meet that expectation. They want to do what's expected of them from the outside, but their expectations for themselves are just as important and maybe more important. And then are questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they believe it makes sense. They hate anything arbitrary or irrational. They want a lot of justification. In a way, they make everything an inner expectation. They can do it if they believe in it. Then are obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. So that's my friend on the track team. When there was a coach and a team, she had no trouble showing up. But when she was just running for herself, she couldn't do it. That's an obliger. Next, finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do, when they want to do it, how they want to do it. If you ask or tell them to do something, they will very likely do the opposite. They always want to act from choice and from freedom. So we're going to go through them again. Raise your hand if you can put yourself into a tendency. And yes, I think most people fit solidly within one tendency. Okay. First, upholders. Readily meet outer and inner alike. Okay, that's my category. Yeah. Okay, next, questioner. Questioners question all expectations. Okay. Next, obligers. Obligers meet outer expectations, have trouble meeting inner expectations. Rebels. Rebels resist all expectations. Okay. So this is consistent with what I generally see, which is by far the smallest category. It's rebels. I've spoken to groups that have no rebels. Next smallest category is upholder. That's a very small category. And that showed me a lot about myself. It's a very small category. Overwhelmingly, people are questioners or obligers. And it kind of goes back and forth which one is bigger. I kind of suspect that obliger is the biggest category, but I can't always tell. If you were an obliger, the absolutely crucial piece is external accountability. This is the magic solution that is going to solve all your problems, I promise. If there's something that you cannot get yourself to do for yourself, build in external accountability. So for instance, somebody said, I love to read, but I never made time to read. I joined a book group where you're really expected to read the book. Now I can read. There was somebody, I thought this was so clever. So it was these two coworkers who wanted to eat more healthfully at lunch. And so what they agreed is like, so you and I are going to do this, and one day you cook for both of us, and one day I cook for both of us. You have to eat it because I brought it for you, and if you don't cook, I don't eat. So I'm accountable to you.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Or the funniest one was two obligers who go to the gym, and when they leave, they swap shoes. So if you don't come, I can't work out because I only have one shoe. You got to show up, or I'm going to be mad. But coaches, you can start groups. On my site, I have a thing for people who want to start a group for people who are just accountability partners, which is something like Weight Watchers or AAs, or so friends of mine who are like a very common problem, can't finish your PhD thesis, right, ABD. So I had all these friends who were ABD, and in all different fields, but they would meet once a month to give themselves the accountability. Now, they met at a bar. I'm not sure it was accountable as they could have been. They had a lot of fun, and they all finished their PhD thesis because they were that accountability. And I think this is why a lot of people, having outside people that will hold you to it is huge. So that's one place for like an obliger. And then let's say, like, I'm an upholder married to a questioner. So it's helpful for me to know I have to give a reason. That's what's going to be compelling. I want to just be able to say, do it, and he does it because I say do it. That's enough for me as an upholder, for better or for worse. But he's like, well, why? Why should I do it? And he doesn't mean that in a snarky way. He's just like, Why should I do it? Why should I listen to you? Why am I doing it this way? Why are we doing this at all? Why today? Why not tomorrow? Yeah, like questioners. And again, like if you're a doctor trying to get a patient to take medication, it's going to be very helpful to know, what are they hearing when you're telling them to do this? How do you speak in a way that's going to be compelling to them, that's going to allow them to form that habit? Because if you're not speaking their language, they might not be able to adapt to it.
How do you get the rebels to do something?
Rebels want to act from freedom and from choice. So one thing is, this is what you like to do. This is fun for you. They're very interested in freedom. This is going to free you. This is going to give you options later. They're very, what I call the strategy of identity, which is when your habits are tied to some aspect of, fundamental aspect of your identity. So well, you want to be a strong leader. What would a strong leader do? A strong leader goes to a staff meeting on time. Even if it seems like a waste of time, that's what a strong leader does, so you can do it. Rebels are often also motivated by the desire to resist. I'll show you. You can't tell me what to do. Things like that can sometimes work. So here's one of my favorite stories. So a friend of mine she has a rebel father and a rebel son, so she was full of stories. And so she and her father go to the doctor, and the doctor's like, Mr. So-and-so, it's extremely serious. You're in a very high-risk category. You need to take this medication regularly, or, in 5 years, like, blah, 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 blah.
Rules.
They get out on the street, and her father looks at her and says, so what do you think? Should I take the medicine? And she said, nah, I wouldn't bother. He said, what, you want me to die? And he took it. She knew her father. I think that knowing the tendencies can give you an edge. Yeah.
Now, I thought that through and through this book about how you can apply this, especially if you had children. This is a really wonderful sort of blueprint. But what about, and you talk a lot about this too, about managing, being your own manager, and managing your own life. And that's, for many of us, the hardest thing to do. It's much easier, especially for mothers, right?
Well, the epigraph to the book is the greatest of empires is the empire over oneself. And because I completely agree with you. Self-mastery to me is, but I say that as an upholder, I have to admit, that self-mastery really is the thing, and that's where habits can help us, because they do allow us to have self-mastery, because they free us from decision-making and having to use self-control, and so we don't have to exhaust ourselves just managing ourselves. That stuff can just be put on automatic pilot, and so then we can go about our business and get done what we want to get done without burning ourselves out.
I want to tell you about this problem I've got that I can't fix.
Okay.
And I couldn't figure out how to fix it after reading your book, which was helpful to me in many, many ways, personally, and as well as looking at Ted and other people. Yeah. So here's this problem I've had, and I'm happy to share this all with you, is that for years, I pile clothes in the bathtub.
Okay.
I don't know if this comes from being
dirty clothes or clean clothes?
Both.
Okay.
Mostly things I've worn once. I work at home, so I'll wear things for an hour.
Yeah.
But I have this weird piling problem, for lack of a better word.
Wait, so it's like you take it off, and instead of putting it back in the closet, you put it in the bathtub? And why do you put it in the bathtub instead of like on the floor next to your bed, which is I think the traditional place to pile it.
Right. See, that's the weirdness. I'm so weird that I don't want it on the floor.
I'm intrigued by the bathtub aspect of it.
I used to live in this walk-up on Lexington and 83rd, 4 flights up, and maybe it's not far from where you live now. And maybe I was just so tired by the time I got upstairs that I didn't know how to put my clothes away. But so this is something that I've struggled with for years, and now that I do cohabitate with someone who I nag about other things, and I thought, okay, I'm going to ask Gretchen in front of 250 of her fans what the hell to do about this problem.
So the first thing always to say is like, well, do you really care? Because sometimes people think that they want to form a habit, but actually they don't really care. And there's this really wonderful Samuel Johnson quotation where he says, all severity that does not increase good or prevent evil is idle. Meaning, a lot of times people will be like, well, I really need to give up coffee. And I'm like, why do you need to give up coffee? And they're like, because everybody says I should. Well, it's like, well, if there's no bad thing. So do you care? And maybe you do care, but do you care?
Well, for sake of this exercise, I'm going to say I do. But
do
truthfully,
care.
I don't really care. Because I manage to still shower.
Yeah.
I don't have to get dressed very often well. So, But say I do care. Well, if you desperately care.
If you really do care. Okay. Because if you don't care, then very few things will work because in the end you really don't care.
Right.
So don't spin your wheels sort of half attempting to change a habit that you don't care. But let's assume you do care.
Which is very important because, as you point out, just to digress, because I don't really want to make it all about me, it just makes your points very well. You talk in here about meditation and how you thought, I got to try it. Everybody's doing it. It sounds great. People say it's life-changing, and you keep trying it. And the conclusion you arrived at was,
it's not for me.
It's not for me. So why keep spinning those wheels?
Right. Because you deplete yourself, or you could be doing other things. So, but let's say you do care. So I have 21 strategies that I talk about, and the same strategies work whether you're trying to make a habit or break a habit. These are strategies that just work. And 21 can sound sort of overwhelming, like, I can't do 21. But that's good, because it means that there's a whole variety from which to choose, and so you can really pick the things that appeal to you, that work with you in your circumstances, that work with you with the habits that you want. There's like, you just can pick a few that will work. There's a lot of options. And I think sometimes people don't realize how many options they do have. But one of the most powerful strategies is the twin strategies of convenience and inconvenience. We are powerfully affected by convenience. If something is the teeniest, tiniest bit more convenient, we are far more likely to do it. So you want to make any habit that you want to keep as convenient as possible, and anything you don't want yourself to do, you want to make inconvenient. And the tiniest things matter. They did this study in a cafeteria where they had a cooler, an ice cream cooler, and it had a lid, a transparent lid. When the lid was open, when the lid was closed, even though it was transparent, something like 36% fewer people took ice cream because they just had to open the lid. That little thing made it just that much harder. So this is a thing, like if you're deciding, should I go to the gym that's across the street from my office, or should I pay a little less for the one 2 blocks away? Buck up for the one that's right across, because it's going to make a difference in your habit altogether. So I would say, like, how convenient it is. So, like, for instance, is your closet crammed full of clothes so it's hard to hang things up? Do you have enough hangers? I can't hang up my coat. I tried and tried and tried. I cannot hang up my coat. Then I put hooks on the door. I can put my coat on a hook. That I can do. I will do that. I won't use a hanger. So could you use hooks?
Yes.
Some people like folding. Some people like hangers. Like, maybe you could just put everything on a hanger or fold everything. You don't have to do what you're supposed to do, what Marie Kondo says you're supposed to do.
Which is throw everything away.
And so things like that. And then inconvenient, like maybe obviously not an active bathtub because it's full of your clothes.
Not always full. I'm a swimmer. I learned to swim at 37, and I do it every single day. It's not like I'm not bathing or taking a shower with the stuff.
Do you use the bathtub as a bathtub?
Not as often.
Okay,
as
well
most
then maybe you want to
people
put
do.
something, like put books in there or some decorative statue from here or something, so that you can't put your clothes in there, because that might disrupt the habit. And also here, this is a really good tip. It's unfortunately, it's not often useful, but when it comes into play, you really want to take advantage of it, which is the strategy of the clean slate. Whenever we have a major transition, it's a huge opportunity to change habits, because the clean slate, all those old habits are wiped away and new habits can crowd in. And it can be something like a new relationship, like a marriage or a divorce, a new baby, a new puppy, a new boss, or a new situation, like a new school or a new job. But most effective is when you physically move. And they did a study of people successfully changing habits, and like a very large percentage of them were associated with a move. So maybe you're not going to move for 15 years, but if you were to move, you would really want to use that transition as a time to be really putting your clothes away to form that habit, and then it'll sort of take off, because now you've got this easy habit just putting in the bathtub. So you want to disrupt that however you can by filling up the bathtub, but even better if you were moving and you didn't have the bathtub in the way you have it now, then you could change that habit more easily. But the slate would be clean.
But the idea is to step back and look at the things that make it possible for you to succeed, as opposed to just sort of descending into the depths of the failure.
Like, I've tried and failed so many times. Oh, another thing might be, this is one thing that I've certainly found for myself, is there's a lot of habits related to the end of the evening. Like, people often don't take their makeup off, they stay up too late, and they throw their clothes on the floor. Maybe you're not doing that, but so the one thing that works really well for me is to get ready for bed earlier in the evening when I'm not so tired, because what was happening is I was so tired that I was staying up later because I was too tired to go to bed, like to do all the work of going to bed. This clearly is an insane reaction, but so now I try to get ready, like put on my pajamas, and it also, I think, makes it easier to fall asleep, because you're sort of starting that downward
Yes.
movement. And here's one thing that really surprised me. One of the things, like if you read magazines in the grocery store line or whatever, one thing you'll see all the time is like, brush your teeth after dinner and it will like prevent night snacking. And I was like, yeah, all right, that's too easy to work. It works amazingly well. It's just like really uncanny how that, and I guess partly it's that your brain is like, well, I guess we're done. This is like, it's a signal that part of the, like the eating part, we're like moving from the kitchen part of the night to the bedroom part of the night. So it's that, it's the clean feeling in your mouth. And then also if you use that time to sort of say like, oh, I am gonna take out my contacts and put on my glasses, or I'm going to put on my pajamas, and then maybe you're not so tired. So the idea of hanging up your clothes doesn't seem so overwhelming, because if you're exhausted, you know, then any kind of additional action just seems like too much to bear. But if it's earlier in the evening, then maybe you're like, oh yeah, I'll just put it away.
Theoretically, I could just sleep in my clothes too.
You could do whatever you want because you're a grown-up. Yeah, and you could do that.
That's really the number one thing I took away from this book, which is why you're guaranteed to be a bestseller. But really what you're saying is step back and look at ways to take something that makes something a habit in a comfortable way for you and in a realistic way.
Yeah, it has to be realistic. Yeah.
I have to ask you, and this is sort of stepping away from topic, you know, did you think when you wrote The Happiness Project that you were going to end up being a guru? Because you really have become that to people.
I don't know. I did not anticipate that the book would resonate with so many people. That's safe to say.
But you have so many people now. You are answering to them, and they're observing you, and you're very personal in this book. But also what's interesting about the book is that you draw not just on your own experiences or your sisters, but your readers. So they really have created a very fertile petri dish for you. Which
I mean, and that's one of the things that was really interesting to me, is because I was reading so much research. I was just reading all this research about habits and willpower and self-control and addiction, and then also things like monastic governance and the design of kindergarten rooms, anything that I could get my hands on that I thought would touch on the subject of habits. When I think of the things that gave me the most insight, or when I felt like I really hit on something, it was from observing the people around me. Like my friend on the track team, or like my friend, so this was weird, and this is when I knew that that there was something afoot, that there was a mystery to be solved. Several people told me the same exact story in almost the same words, and it didn't make sense to me. But I was like, something's happening here, because why are they having exactly the same experience? So here's the story. Like, I remember it most vividly when a friend told me this at a college reunion. He said, "It's the weirdest thing, speaking of habits. I wanted to form the habit of running, so I decided to run the marathon. And I loved running for the marathon, and I trained for the marathon, and I bored all my friends, telling them how much I loved training for the marathon. And I ran the marathon, and it was amazing. And then I took those rest days off that they tell you to take, and I haven't run since." And this was something, and this to me was very perplexing. It didn't make any sense to me, because I was like, oh, hitting a finish line, that's going to be so exciting, and you're going to be so gratified. It's going to give you energy to keep your habit, and like, no, but many people were this exact same story. And so I began to think like, okay, something's happening here that I'm not understanding, because if so many people I'm hearing this story, you know, like it's coming up. And so it was my observation of the people around me and what they were saying that really was this clue. And so I really feel like that's when I would see things. Maybe it's just, you just see them more vividly when it's like the people in front of you. And that's when I felt like I really was the most helpful.
But that's a really interesting example, because how many of us have known people who zealously embrace something new, and it involves buying a lot of accoutrement. And it's all more about shopping than it is. I think some people have babies that way, right? It's like all about...
Yeah, that's the overbuyer, underbuyer distinction that I talk about.
Let's talk about that, because I found that very interesting. And I, too, like you, am an underbuyer, which is good, since I throw all my clothes in the bathtub. It would be disastrous.
Yeah. Weirdly, underbuyers don't like to get rid of things, because they hate the thought that they might have to replace it. You're like, well, I can't get rid of that nasty white shirt, because what if I need a white shirt and I don't have one? I would have to go buy one. Okay, so I have a chapter called The Strategy of Distinctions. And this is because what I came to realize was that we often overestimate the degree to which we are like other people. And so we think, well, if this is what Steve Jobs did, well, then it's going to work for me. Or if this is what worked for my sister-in-law, this is what's going to work for me. And we don't understand how we're alike or different, and so how our habits would have to change. So one of the distinctions that I mentioned is the distinction between underbuyers and overbuyers. Now, a lot of people are just in the middle. They're just normal. But underbuyers are people like us. We hate to shop and buy. And like, we will go to elaborate lengths not to make a purchase. Like, and it's not, at least for me, it's not about spending the money.
No.
It's just about like hating the whole process of like going into a store and buying something. And so, and then there's overbuyers, and overbuyers are the opposite. So like, they're going on a trip. And they think, oh, well, I need like 15 different things to prepare for this trip. Or, you know, I'm going to get this in 3 different colors because, or this might come in handy. I'm in a hardware store. Oh, well, this could come in handy. Or this would make a great gift. I mean, I have a friend who just buys stuff thinking like, well, this will make a great gift. Like, how many times does an adult give a gift in the course of a year? Like, not that many times, you know, like a very specific gift. And this matters for habits because for the reason that you say. So underbuyers need to remind themselves that it's good to spend money and to like really force yourself to make that purchase if it's going to support a habit that's important to you. Like the example that I always think of is when I belonged to a gym that was in my neighborhood, and I didn't get a locker because I was like, well, I'm only like, why should I pay for a locker when I'm only walking 2 blocks? And then finally I was like, it's just a pain to have to, and then I could never go there on my way from someplace else, or I'd have to bring my clothes. It was this huge thing. Get a locker, and of course it was much more convenient, back to convenience, to go to the gym, and so that I went to the gym a lot more, and so that habit became strengthened. Overbuyers often, like, they will get so enthusiastic about the idea of doing something that they will buy all this stuff, and then sometimes, like, that's even enough for them, and they never even get to the underlying thing. And I had a roommate after college who, like, got really into rollerblading, and she got the pads, and she got the helmet, and she got the rollerblades, but then she never learned to rollerblade. But that was like, she didn't even care, because she had got the stuff. And so overbuyers need to remember, you know, you don't need to have this pair of running shoes or this pair of running shoes and the book about running and the, you know, the thing that's going to time you and the reflector about, you can just start, you know, just start and not load yourself up with gear. And underbuyers need to remember that sometimes it is important to buy the things that are going to support you in a habit.
These days, with the phone and the computer, we can measure everything we do. I've been taking pictures of you since you walked in the door an hour ago. It's almost, is that helpful in habits? You talk about how technology is useful for you in keeping certain habits, setting alarms when you go to bed, which is very smart. I never have a problem going to bed, but some people do.
Some people really do. It's interesting. That's a big thing that a lot of people struggle with.
And I mean, I get crazy when I cross the street and it's counting down. I have 20 seconds to cross because I feel like there's so much information coming at me, and that's making me a little bit nutty.
Too much enumeration.
Too much, and not enough dream out to the space kind of time. But I wonder what you found about how to modulate goodness that these things provide versus the ADD-ness of it. That could be, we could talk about that. You could write a whole other book about that.
Well, there's sort of 2 things that you're talking about. One is the strategy of monitoring, which is a very, very powerful strategy, which is that research shows that anytime you monitor how much you do something, you tend to, even if you're not consciously trying to change your behavior, you will start to behave better. So if you, and these are very common examples, if you keep a food journal, if you count your steps, if you keep a budget, if you do anger, like if you calculate how many times you lose your temper, you will start to do better. So monitoring tends to be a very powerful way to begin a habit change, because just by knowing how much you're doing something, sleeping, if you know how much you're sleeping, a lot of times people are getting more sleep than they think, but then maybe you're not getting as much sleep as you think. It's just good to know how much you're doing. But then I think you're talking about something larger, which is like the feeling that a lot of people have, which is that they're never really at leisure, that there's sort of a mix between work and play, and that there's sort of no respite, or there's no refuge. And so how do you turn off? Now, one way that I turn off is that every night I give myself quitting time. And quitting time is, at that point, I stop working. And every night it's different because my schedule is very different, which drives me crazy. I would like to have a perfectly regular schedule, but I don't. And then after quitting time, I don't do any work. And so then I feel like, okay, now I'm goofing off and I don't feel like I have to do any work. So I think some people, like if they had quitting time, that would help.
Do you turn off your devices?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't look at them
Quitting
anymore.
is just, it's done.
Just I'm done. and then, you know, and then another thing to do with managing your devices is, again, just making it inconvenient. A lot of people walk around with it in their back pocket, so they've pulled it out and are looking at it before they're even aware of it. Well, so one thing you could do is you could keep it in your coat pocket, hung up in the closet. So if you want to go check, if you're like desperate to go check it, you can go check it, but you got to go over to the closet, open it up, fish it out of your pocket, take a look at it, put it back, you know, just it's so that you keep it from just being within easy reach, because if it's that convenient to do it, it's going to be very hard to resist for most people, because there's the intermittent reinforcement of checking your device, and there's nothing more powerful than for habits than intermittent reinforcement. And just go to Las Vegas and you will see it all happening right in front of your eyes. And so there's a lot of different ways to tackle it. And that's definitely, at the introduction of the book, I talk about the essential 7, which are the 7 categories that practically every habit that people want to change falls into one of 7 categories. And rest, relax, and enjoy is definitely one of the big categories. People feel like, whether it's they can't get enough sleep, or they just kind of can't relax, or they can't get into that dreamy frame of mind, they want it, and they need to figure out how to change their habits so that they can make it happen.
Does it get tiring having people ask you to solve their problems?
I love it, because it's so fascinating to me. I've never heard of somebody keeping their clothes in the bathtub. I think that's fascinating.
I'm glad
I want to go keep, but wait, maybe, well, our mother kind of keeps towels in the bathtub someplace. Elizabeth, yeah, she's got some stuff going on in her bathtub, now that I think about it.
I love my bathtub.
Yeah.
What about with your kids? How do we come out with these proclivities fully formed, would you say?
Pretty hardwired, I would say.
Hardwired. So with your kids, they are not little mini Gretchens, probably sometimes to your chagrin.
Right, yes.
So what would you advise to the people here who do have humans in their care?
What can you do to help other people with their habits? Well, one of the things is that we have an extraordinary influence on each other with our habits. And so if you want people to have good habits, the first thing to do is have good habits yourself. So if you want your kids not to be on their devices, then you need to manage your own devices. And, you know, and so that's the good place to start. Like, and this is something, it's called health concordance in long-term couples, where their health behaviors tend to merge. So if one person gets type 2 diabetes, the other one's much more likely to get it. If one quits drinking, the other one's much more likely to quit drinking. So for better and for worse. So everybody that you're coming into contact with, you are influencing, which is why, so you really want to hang out with people who have good habits that you want to emulate, because it's going to rub off on you a lot. So one thing is to have good habits yourself. And the other thing is to make it as convenient as possible for them to do whatever it is that you're trying to encourage. And so one thing I did with my older daughter, who's now 16, was she was in this bad habit of waiting like deep into the weekend to do her work, and partly she needed more time, but also she just felt like it was ruining her whole weekend. It was just taking up everything. And so I said to her, well, what if you got up at 8 o'clock on Sunday and worked in the morning? Well, she would like to sleep till like 10 or 11. And I was like, so get up early and work, and get like a really solid thing done on Sunday that morning, and get it under your belt. And she agreed, which I was sort of amazed by. But what do I do to support that habit? So I wake her up, I bring her, she's in my office with me, because other people, I'm there working, she's there working, but I think it's like she's less likely to go, screw around on, Snapchat or whatever if I'm right there. And I literally bring her breakfast on a tray, like tea and like peanut butter on toast and apple slices or whatever, eggs, whatever she wants. Like bring it to her on a tray. Like if she's cold, I bring her a little blanket. Like I make it as pleasant and nice as possible, because it's not really a habit that she is inclined to want to keep, to foster. And so by making it as convenient, as pleasant as possible, it's helped her stick with it. And so it's a very positive habit, but I did everything to make it as convenient and pleasant as possible. So that's another way.
Is this the same daughter you have a Wednesday afternoon?
Yes, yeah. That's another habit. So I was feeling like I didn't have enough time with her, because my younger daughter, I still walk to school, so we have all this time, and she's just around more, because when they're big, they're doing things on their own. So one of the things that I had learned from the Happiness Project is that if there's something missing in your life, really figure out like what is it, and try to figure out a solution. Don't just think like, oh, I never see my teenager again, anymore. It's so sad. And it just be like, okay, well, what could I do about it? And so I thought, okay, well, we'll have this afternoon once a week where I meet her after school and we go do something together. And so there's no homework, there's no errands. It's just, we just do something very very simple. And it's really a nice, quiet, easy time. And this is the strategy of scheduling, which is that if there's something that you really want to have happen, actually put it on the schedule. Because something that can be done at any time is often done at no time. And if I were just like, oh, well, I should totally go to see that exhibit at the Met with my daughter one afternoon after school, I would never do it, because it's just like, when are you going to do that? It had to go on the schedule. And so if there's something important to you, if there's a habit that's important to you, for many people, most people, just putting it on the calendar has an enormous persuasive effect. So it's not like I'm just going to exercise tomorrow, it's I'm going to exercise tomorrow at 8:30. It's not I'm going to work on I'm going to write 800 words on my novel. It's like I'm going to write 800 words on my novel at 2 p.m. You know, so the more precisely it's in your schedule, then the easier it is to fulfill.
I used to work for the public radio show Marketplace, and Kai Rizdal scheduled when he surfed the web. That's how organized he was. So he would schedule idiot time for web, like half hour at 8:30, and I always was so impressed by that. That's why he's so famous.
I mean, because that's something, there's procrastinasurfing, you know, which is, you're like, I'm just going to go to BuzzFeed for like 10 minutes.
3 hours later.
It's just 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. So it's something like if you're doing it for half an hour, then it's like it has a beginning and an end.
Yeah, it was his indulgence. Yeah. Has everyone here seen the video that Gretchen has about her younger daughter and the bus? Oh. Talk about that, because that was uniting happiness and habit. It's a really beautiful video about appreciating the moment that you're in.
Right. The days are long, but the years are short.
Yes.
Yeah, it was about a moment that I had with my daughter. She was too little to walk to nursery school, so we would take the bus. And I didn't hate taking the bus, but when I didn't have to take the bus, it always felt sort of like a little relief, like we didn't have to walk over to 3rd Avenue and get the bus up. And then one day we were there, and she was so excited by something she saw out the window, and I realized, that this was the essence of childhood. That riding the bus together was the thing itself. It wasn't the thing to wish away, but to actually appreciate. And when I wrote this little story, I said, and one day we won't do it anymore, and indeed we do not do it anymore. So that time has already passed.
And yet she remembers it fondly.
Yeah, she does. Yes.
So what you saw as a chore, the habit of getting your kid to school every day, was actually something that was beautiful and important.
Yes, and looking back on it, like many things in life, we complain about them when they're happening, and then we look back on them with tremendous nostalgia and regret. So. So that was an important realization for me.
That was a beautiful way of sort of showing that maybe folding your clothes might be a pain, but it's the habits that we need to sort of adopt or want to adopt to make our lives better really can also be nurturing and enervating too.
Yes, well, and it's interesting, one of the features of habits, something that's both a positive and a negative is that habits deaden. And that when you make something of a habit, you don't feel it as deeply. So if it's a pleasure, you feel it much less deeply, which we've all experienced with like that morning coffee that used to be like, ecstasy, and now it's just like, okay, you don't even drink, you taste it, but if you don't have it, you're frantic. But if there's something that's causing you anxiety, if you do it, if you make it into a habit, it will cease to bother you. So the negative emotions also kind of dissipate. And something that they've shown is that when people are very stressed out, they revert to their habits, whether good or bad. People often think, well, if I'm really stressed out, I'm going to have a bad habit. No, you go back to the habit itself. So they were looking at students during exam time, and the students who usually ate a healthy breakfast ate a healthy breakfast. And the students who usually ate an unhealthy breakfast ate unhealthily. And the ones that usually read the newspaper diligently read the newspaper, and the ones who didn't. And so it's sort of like you want to have those good habits because that's what you turn to, because they're reassuring to you, because they're familiar, and this is what you're going to return to. So if they're positive, that's going to help you in a tough time. But if they're negative, then that's what you're going to turn to too. So.
But not everyone is fortunate to have you as their mother. So how you re-engineer those habits that might have been infringed on you by growing up in the wrong home is tough.
Yes, yeah. It's hard to overcome early training. But you know, my focus is always like the person themselves. I think, and I think of all the strategies that I talk about in the book, the strategy of other people is the one that itself could be. It's like such a huge subject. It was hard even to think about making it into a chapter because how we affect each other is just such a vast topic. And then because sometimes you have somebody who's raising you with bad habits, and then sometimes you get the backlash. Somebody's raising you with habits that are too good, and so then you resist. Or, you know, is it that somebody raised you this way, or you were just that way naturally anyhow?
Right.
I think sometimes people take too much responsibility. They think, like, a lot of people say to me, like, well, I have to have my children clean their rooms because they're going to get to college, and then they're going to be really messy, and their roommates are going to look at them with scorn. And I'm like, you know what? Most people get to college, and they do what they want to do. I mean, I just think that, you know, I'm not so sure that we have to feel like we're responsible for every single thing that our children do. I'm a big believer in things being hardwired and people having an essential nature. And so you can really, really mess them up. But I'm not sure that you can tinker with them around the edges all that much. Or maybe I just say that to myself because I don't want to have to bother with it. Yeah.
Tell us about the secrets of adulthood. I love that phrase. Keeps coming up in your book, and you have.
Yeah. These are just like the little things that I feel like I've learned the hard way. And as a writer, I'm very intrigued by the challenge of taking a big idea and trying to phrase it very concisely. Mm-hmm. And how do you say it? So like one of my favorite secrets of adulthood is accept yourself and expect more from yourself. So like both of those things are true. Or well, the best strategy. I mean, everybody's favorite strategy is the strategy of treats, which is that we should all give ourselves lots of treats, lots of healthy treats, because when you give yourself healthy treats, then you give yourself a boost in self-command, and that's when you can keep your good habits. And I was trying to think of like, what's the secret of adulthood for the strategy of treats, because it seemed like such this big, complicated idea, and I realized that when you give more to yourself, you can ask more from yourself. But then some secrets of adulthood are just like, things taste better when you eat with your hands. Another secret of no one ever regrets recharging their cell phone. That's a, you know, so there's secrets of adulthood that are like the little bits of wisdom I feel like I've acquired the hard way.
You are an avid reader, and along with exercise and eating right and getting enough sleep, a lot of people complain about not having more time to read.
Yes.
And as a busy person, I'm curious how you work reading into your world, because you do it in abundance, it seems like.
Yes, I do. And you know, this was really puzzling to me because of monitoring. I thought, okay, I'm gonna monitor how much time I read, because I feel like I never am reading. Like I can't remember a time in the day when I was sitting reading, and yet I would see that books, like I would have library books that I'd read and I was returning, or I would buy a book and I would put it on the shelf and I'd read it. So clearly I was reading, so that, okay, so I made this like sheet, this time log, which actually is on my site too, if you wanna do a daily time log for anything. And I could not make myself do it. I could not make myself stick with it. I don't know why. That was a habit I could not form. I could not track my reading time. But I realized that I was reading. But I did do two habits related to reading. One is study time, which is that each weekend I try to spend at least an hour doing study reading, which is reading that is, and so I'm a really, like, take reading very seriously. I have all these categories of reading. So that's neither pleasure reading, something that I'm reading for fun, and it's not work reading. So it's something that's challenging, and often it's something that's like deeply boring but also fascinating. So it's really challenging to read, like Marshall McLuhan, perfect example. It's really boring, but it's also incredibly fast. I never feel like picking it up. Right now I'm reading a lot of Christopher Alexander. And then just making sure that I have time to read for fun, you know, because I just, it's so important to me. And then I'm in a lot of book groups, so then I have to read for the book groups. That's accountability too, so I have to read for them.
Andy Warhol you're reading?
Oh yeah, I'm reading Andy Warhol, Popism. It's amazing. So.
I would never have pegged you for an Andy Warhol reader, but that's why you're so fascinating.
Everyone should read Andy Warhol, brilliant writer.
I'm going to, yeah, good. So I think that we're ready.
Yeah.
Ted's got the microphone. Are there questions?
I'm one of the few rebel people, and so I'm always challenging myself, and I find I have a problem with habits, especially like procrastination, because all these years, the payoff is that I am able to get something done in that little bit of time. So do you address how to change payoffs?
You do have a problem with procrastination, or you do not?
I do have a problem with procrastination, but when I am able to complete that job in that truncated time, then I'm feeling even better about myself.
Right.
You know.
So how do you get yourself to do it as a rebel? Well, it's always from choice and freedom for rebels, so it's what you choose to do. Also, rebels often want to, they like to meet a challenge, and so figuring out a way to make it a challenge that's interesting to you, like, doing it in your own way, or doing it in a new way, or like doing it like in a short time span or something like that, because rebels often want to put their own stamp on something. They don't want to just do something, they want to do it in their own way, and that makes it a lot more interesting to them. But how rebels manage themselves is something that is really fascinating to me, and I'm thinking that I'm going to write like a little field guide to the Four Tendencies to go much more deeply into them, because how is it that, because many rebels are very, very successful, and I'm fascinated by how can you, if you don't want to do something that you don't want to do, how do you do something that you don't want to do? And rebels are really good at figuring that out. But it's fascinating to me. So it's tricky, but a lot of rebels seem to be able to figure that out.
I feel like we're on Dr. Phil right now.
Yeah.
Thank you for your wonderful books. They have really helped me.
Aw.
I just wanted to ask you, I think the pursuit of happiness is universal to all religions. But I was wondering if you could tell us about how and why Saint Therese has had such a strong influence on you, and if her spirituality has ever made you consider converting to Catholicism.
What an interesting question. I do sort of wonder if Saint Therese is up there, working her bidding. So Saint Therese is this Catholic saint who lived around the time of Winston Churchill, just to put her in your mind.
Who you wrote a biography
I wrote a biography of her, so I was very interested that they were kind of at the same time period because they were having extremely different experiences of life. And Therese is not just a saint, but she's a doctor of the church. There are very few doctors of the church, so she's not just a saint, she's a super saint. But I'm not Catholic, so I didn't really know anything about Saint Therese, and I found out about her because Thomas Merton, who maybe you've read like Seven Storey Mountain or anything, he's a very grouchy, misanthropic type of guy, and a very unsentimental, and he was talking about the little flower and how the little flower had influenced him, and I was like, who is the saint of the little flower that even Thomas Merton has reverence for? So I read her spiritual memoir, which I highly, highly recommend, called Story of a Soul. And this was, so Therese came from a very religious family. All of her sisters became nuns, and when she entered a convent by special permission at the age of 15, her mother superior was her actual sister. And, wow. And her actual sister ordered her under the vow of obedience to write the story of her spiritual childhood. So Therese did. And this is the story of a soul. It's the story of Saint Therese. And I mean, I've read this book like 17 times. It is an extraordinary book for so many reasons. And Therese is the little flower. And I thought it was like, oh, you're like a little flower. But it's like she said that there are great souls like roses and lilies, but that she was a little flower, like a violet. And that they were also pleasing to Jesus, but her greatness is her smallness. I mean, it's just, she's in this place of paradox and deep symbolism. But anyway, in thinking about happiness, I'm thinking about like sort of the power of the everyday. Therese is sort of the saint of everyday life and of everyday sacrifices. And one of my favorite examples is like she talks about trying to master herself when she's in evening prayers and this nun is making clicking sounds with her teeth while they're praying, and the sweat is dripping down her back because she's just so annoyed by it, and just so trying to control herself. And if you've ever been around somebody like that smacking their gum and you're like, I can't restrain myself. Anyway, she's got an incredible sense of humor, which is unusual in a saint. But so I was just so moved by it, and so many things. There's just so many lines from her memoir that wouldn't even make sense out of context. So it was a very, very powerful influence on me. It has not made me want to convert to Catholicism, but it has certainly given me, I think, a very deep appreciation for everything that she believes. It's a very extreme vision Very powerful, very beautiful.
And you were drawn to it, you say, because of your interest in Winston Churchill.
No, because of Thomas Merton.
Oh, sorry.
Because, I mean, Thomas Merton, if you read any Thomas Merton, like the last thing that you think he's going to be doing is sitting around talking about how great this like 17-year-old French nun was.
Yeah.
Like, that's like not the way that he is wired for the most part. And so I was like, well, what's got Thomas Merton's respect? And so then I read Story of a Soul. It's just, but I have to stop here because once I start on Saint Therese, I will just keep going.
We're all
Story of a Soul. Read it.
Hi. In forming a new habit, you have to kick an old habit, and I feel it's a very frustrating catch-22. Every day I wake up with the best intention not to eat sugar at 3 p.m., like a whole giant plate of sugary food, and every day I have it when you're tired and you've had a long day, and you go back to your old habits. Do you have advice on getting over that hump?
Okay, what are you eating at 3 o'clock?
Just bad sugary food like treats and things like that.
Uh-huh.
Bad treats, not healthy treats.
Not healthy treats. And so, and what exactly is it? If I can
Whatever's around the
Whatever's
office.
around?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is going to sound radical, but stay with me here.
Okay.
One of the things that I found, this is the strategy of abstaining. So for some people, for many people, it's easier to give something up altogether than it is to have something sometimes. It sounds harder because you're saying you're not going to have any, but for many people, it is actually easier. And again, to bring up Samuel Johnson again, I got this insight from Samuel Johnson because I read this anecdote where someone said, oh, will you take a little wine? And Samuel Johnson said, I can't have a little. Abstinence is as easy to me as temperance would be difficult. So maybe it would be easier for you to have no candy. Never. Like whatever it is that you're eating, are you eating the same thing every day or you're eating whatever's around?
Yeah, but how do you do it that first day?
Huh?
How do you do it that first day to
You just don't have it. The first day is probably the easiest day, actually. Starting is easy. Continuing is hard. Starting over is harder. But a lot of times giving up something altogether, for some people, is easier. However, that is not true of everyone. This is a strategy where there's like two groups of people, and this is about facing a strong temptation, not a weak temptation. If you're like whatever, you kind of like potato chips, that's not your kryptonite. This is for something you feel a strong temptation to. For many people, it's easier. But for some people, they get panicky and rebellious if they're told they can never have something. They do better when they have something sometimes or a little bit. And this is the trademark move of a moderator. Moderators will often keep, and this is the pattern, I'm going to ask how many people have this. They keep a bar of fine chocolate squirreled away somewhere, and every day they have one square. Who does this here? Okay. I could not eat one square of chocolate. I mean, it would haunt me all day long until I ate that chocolate. I'm an abstainer, all or nothing. And so I think a lot of times when you're like that, you're making things harder for yourself because you're like, well, I'm just going to have a little bit. I'm just going to have one. I'm just going to have one today, but not tomorrow. And you get into this constant decision-making thing. But the thing about habits is that you eliminate decision. Like people often say, oh, I want to make healthy choices. No, don't make healthy choices. Make one choice, stop choosing, stick to that. So if you just say to yourself, I'm not going to eat candy, or I'm not going to eat junk food, or I'm not going to eat them at the office, maybe you want to say, well, I can have these things, but not at the office. Like I'm only going to eat, XYZ kind of thing. And that's an absolute rule because you're saying that trying to be moderate is not working for you, so maybe abstaining. And again, I want to emphasize, many people will say to me like, oh, well, it works for you because you've got so much willpower. This is the easier way. This is the lazy way. If you're an abstainer, this is easier. Being moderate is too hard for us. We can't have a little bit.
But what about,
all or nothing.
What about replacing? In this case, is bringing fruit, making yourself bring fruit or bring something else that you can look forward to?
Yeah, you could do that. Yeah. I mean, I just think like if what you want is like to
Oreos.
buy, Oreos out of the vending machine, like bringing a couple Mandarin oranges is probably not going to, I mean, maybe that could work. I mean, it's worth a shot. It's worth a shot to replace. But often you have the Mandarin oranges and then you're like, oh my gosh, well, what the heck, I'm going to have the cookies too, right? Life is incomplete. Like, well, how can I live my life without the cookies? I'll start tomorrow. I've been so good today. I deserve it. It's my birthday. Oh, it's raining. I need to embrace myself just as I am. You only live once. What's one day? It's like what's in the context of my life. It doesn't matter. So that's loophole spotting. That's my favorite strategy. The whole book, the chapter on loophole spotting, because they are so hilarious. All the loopholes that we can come up with to excuse ourselves, this is genius. We're such advocates for ourselves.
I'll quit drinking tomorrow. Right.
Tomorrow, that's the tomorrow loophole.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what I do today, I'm going to be good tomorrow.
Well, that's why what your sister said about not having, the people who bring donuts into the office should be just...
The evil donut bringer.
Yes,
yeah.
terrible.
Yeah.
Hi, you spoke about the 4 different characteristics, and I was wondering, I'm definitely a rebel, but I was wondering if you've ever found that people can have all 4 personalities. Can you be a rebel, an obliger, and a questioner, or can you change throughout your life?
I think that this is very hardwired, and that basically it shapes your perspective on the world, and so you do not change tendencies. But I do think that with age and with wisdom and experience, you can offset the limitations. Like, all of these tendencies have good points and bad points. All of them, there are people in these tendencies who are big successes and big failures, because they all have, it's a question of how you manage yourself. So I think that some people, as they get older, like as an upholder, I've learned to question. My impulse is to do something that's expected of me, but now I know I need to step back, slow down that impulse and say, why am I doing this? Is this something that I really need to do? So I think you can do that. I think sometimes people misdiagnose themselves because they don't really understand. So for instance, I was talking to a high school student, and he said, well, I'm a mix, because if a teacher who I respect asks me to do something, then I'll do it, and so I act like an upholder. But if a teacher I don't respect asks me to do something, I don't do it, and I'm a rebel. And I was like, no, you're 100% questioner. Because a questioner says, why am I listening to you? Why should I do what you say? I'm going to do what I think is right. If I respect you, I'll do it. So that's very questioner. So I think, like, if I got you and I sat you down, maybe I could, like, get you, like, firmly in a category. And then also a lot of people get confused because they're like, I'm half obliger and half upholder. Well, upholders and obligers both readily meet external expectations, so in that way they're the same. But what distinguishes them is how they meet inner expectations. So to be an obliger is not to be an upholder. They're inconsistent with each other. I will say this, though. There's a very, very strong affinity between rebels and obligers. They pair up together often. Obligers have certain kind of rebel-like qualities to them when they burn out, and they have obliger rebellion. And I wondered, this is a very striking pattern. Obligers, tell me if you've experienced this, where obligers they meet expectations. You know, and the thing is, obligers feel like everybody takes advantage of them, and the fact is that's true. Because the other tendencies are like, well, who am I going to ask to do something? Somebody is going to do what I ask for them and ignore what they want to do for themselves, like, right? So we are taking advantage of them. So then they burn out, and then they fall into this pattern of obliger rebellion where seemingly often arbitrarily, it's like they snap, and they refuse to do something that's expected of them. It's like they put their foot down. And sometimes it's a little thing, and sometimes it's a big thing. It can be a very destructive pattern. So you want to help the obliger. If you're an obliger, you want to avoid getting to that place. And if you work with them or manage them or have them in your household, you want to help them not burn out and help them not feel exhausted and depleted the way they can sometimes. So there's this very deep affinity. And there are a couple, again, because I just observe the people around me, there are a couple of examples of people in my life where I wonder if they've gone so deep into obliger that they've kind of come out the rebel way. They have had really unusually large personality changes, and I'm trying to understand if this has to do with the obliger into rebel pattern. If they have gone into some other, like, deep space kind of situation, but I haven't really figured it out. One of the person did a lot of drugs, so I'm like, well, maybe it was just the drugs. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe the drugs were like part of, like, was a symptom, not a cause. I don't know. So, but anyway, I've been thinking about it. But I think basically for the most part, people are what they are. And so the thing is not to try to change yourself, but to manage yourself better. Because all these things can work for you if you figure out the way to manage them.
2 more questions.
Hi, Gretchen. It's a pleasure to hear you speak, and I've been following your blog for over 5 years.
Oh, well, thank you. That's
thank you for coming out here, and I'm glad you get to spend some time with your sister.
Yes.
It's weird seeing you outside of yoga clothes.
Oh, I know. No, I did an interview with a reporter, and she's like, in your honor, I wore yoga pants. I was like, in your honor, I didn't. Like, it's the rare day when I'm not wearing yoga pants. Yeah.
When do you decide that you're done researching? You have said over and over again that, I'm still looking into this, and you're so passionate about what you write about. when do you decide to just, just write it? And
Right.
like, are you pressured by your publisher? Like,
Right,
where
right.
does it come from?
Well, one time when I was writing my Churchill book, I was pressured by my agent. She called me up one day and she's like, okay, no more research. Like, no more note cards, no more nothing. Like, it's on the page, you gotta work with what's on the page. And this is an interesting question because it is kind of limitless, and that's part of what makes it exciting, but then there has to become a point. But I definitely get to a point where I feel like, first of all, I have to confess, when I started this and I realized that I was going to do the strategies, I anticipated finding like 6 to 8 strategies. And so as it was starting to creep up into the higher and higher numbers, I almost got panicky. I'm like, how many strategies am I going to identify? Because you can't write a book of 75 strategies that would be readable. But it ended at 21. And once I got to 21, I started to see that anything else that I identified fit into the pattern. Like everything was, and that's enormously satisfying when it's like every puzzle piece has its place. I'm like, this goes here, and this goes here, and this example goes here. And then sometimes I'd be very puzzled, and then I'd be like, oh, right, this is really an example I was puzzled by the idea of finish lines, like the marathon, and it took me a long time to understand that this was really about reward, that's where it fit in, because I was like, I don't understand where it goes in this puzzle piece, but then I was able to see how it fit in. And so once I start seeing that everything is fitting in, and I'm just kind of adding more and more details, that's when I stop, because that's when it becomes, at one point, and I had already cut the book way down. The book was 140,000 words. It's now 80,000 words. And there's no fewer ideas. It was just so many examples. And like quotations, because I love quotations, so it was so many quotations. And then like the loopholes, there were like pages and pages and pages of loopholes because I just love them so much, so I had to put them all in. So then I have to take them all out, and like pick and choose the best ones. So once everything's in place, then I can start really, really fighting my impulse to just add example after example, because I just find them so enchanting. I just love them. Each one to me has like a special nuance, and just saying like, I can't include that encyclopedic thing, and so that's when it starts to like take on its final form, and I stop adding anything that unless it's like a new idea, something so powerful. My big fear is always that there'll be some big idea that occurs to me after it's too late, but so far that hasn't happened.
You're far too organized.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I echo the sentiments of others here. It's been great to hear you speak. It's my first time at Life Talks. But, we all know that term, old habits die hard. Yes. And so in particular, I just wanted to ask you, my father's in his 60s now, and he is, he claims to be a night owl. Yes. And he's like, oh, it's just years, I've always did. How do you work to try and maybe, whether it's a parent or somebody else who has these habits that he always has the intentions of going to bed early and getting the day started, but yet, come 11, midnight, he's still in his little office working away. So.
Yeah.
How do you switch someone?
So this goes to the strategy of distinctions. And it turns out that there really are larks and owls. There really are morning people and there really are night people. And a lot of us are sort of in the middle, but these are hardwired patterns. And I used to think, I'm a lark myself, a morning person, and I used to think that night people could turn themselves into morning people if they just went to bed earlier and got up earlier, that they could train it. They can't. This is like a hardwired genetic thing. Now it's interesting that it's your father, because as people get older, they naturally become larkish. And teenagers naturally become owls. And this is like a very decided pattern that's very universal. So if your father, as the father of a grown person, is still an owl, he's a hardcore owl. And one of the things that I think is a real disservice among habits is a lot of times people will say if something's important to you, get up early and do it. And that's a good advice for some people, but it's not good advice for everybody, because some people can barely get to work on time. They are struggling just to get, and they probably are better off trying to organize their life so that their day can start later. And in fact, when they look at larks and owls, owls tend to be less happy than larks, and they think that's because the world is set up for larks. And little kids get up early, and so there's a lot of pressure on people to start the day early, and for some people that is just not how they are wired. And so I would say if you're and if you look at it, the thing about an owl, it's not somebody who's just staying up late and binge watching bad television. It's this is really when they are their most creative and productive. And you'll be the first one to say, oh, you should go to bed early so you can get your day started early. Well, because it sounds like great advice for other people, right? Like, of course it sounds like good advice. Early bird gets the worm. But the fact is, does it work for you? And this is the big thing. And this is a great way to end the talk, because I know that's our last question, is that it doesn't matter what makes sense on paper. It doesn't matter what worked for somebody else. It doesn't matter how you wish you were. Like, sure, you might wish, you're like, oh, it would be so amazing if I could get up early and go for a run, and then I'd make breakfast for my kids, and the day would start out right, and then every day you're just dragging yourself out of bed. It's like, we have to take ourselves into account. You have to think about what's true for you, and if it's just not going to work for you. And I think a lot of people get discouraged because they've tried to form habits in a way that isn't really right for them. And so then when it didn't work out, they feel discouraged, they feel powerless. But in fact, if they would try it a different way, they might have very, very different kind of success. So it might be that your father kind of is intellectually bought into the idea that it's a good idea to do it, even though it doesn't work for him. And so maybe the fact is like, he shouldn't try to change you, and you shouldn't try to change him, but both of you should just try to figure out how to make the most out of what you are. So that's really the main thing I would say, last point for me, is there's no magic one-size-fits-all solution. It would be great to like do it first thing in the morning, or do it for 30 days, or start small, or indulge, eat healthily every day, and then give yourself a cheat day once a week. I mean, all those work for some people and not for others. They work sometimes, not other times. We have to really think about ourselves and what's true for us, and like set up our habits in the way that can allow us to succeed.
Know thyself.
Know thyself. Everybody knows that it's like the hardest thing in the world.
But this helps. Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.